I'm going to show you how to do some Docker inter-container communication. If you have a client inside one container that needs to talk to a server inside a second container, here's one way to go about it. In order to demonstrate this, I need to use some type of client and server, and I'm going to be using the Redis server for this. And I'm going to base my containers off the official Docker Hub Redis image. And in order to save some time, I've already gone there. But basically, it's a key value store. You can, under a certain key, you can store your value. You can either run this Redis server persistently or as something that forgets everything once it's restarted. And I'm going to be doing the latter. And as you see in the description, there's some information on how to run this, but there's also some information that needs to be done. Since you can run Docker using Docker Compose and get several containers and networks and everything you need, volumes and everything you need set up immediately, sadly you also get some things for free there. But we don't get it for free since we're going to be running it like individual lines, starting separate containers. So we need to get our own network set up. And in order to do this, we're going to be calling Docker. We also need to do something with network. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a network. It's just something named, any container referring to the same network as its network can talk to each other. And we're going to be using a really bad name for this network. It's going to be called network. But in order to show that it's just a name, I'm calling it network A. Okay. Now we're going to start our Redis server. We're going to run a new container. We're going to name it something in order for the client to be able to call into it. It's going to get on this network, it's going to get an IP address, but I don't know this at the moment. But if I give it a name, when the client looks up this name from some dynamic DNS thing inside, it's going to get the actual IP address back. So we're going to call this server, which is really a bad name again, but I'm going to call it server A, just so you see that it's just a name. What else do we need this server to do? It needs to know about the network, otherwise everything we've done so far is unusable. So sorry about that. Network A, let's call that. We're going to run this container detached. We're not going to talk to it, type anything to it, well, we're going to call it indirectly, but we're going to go through a second container. We're going to contain the client. And we're going to base this container on the Redis image. And hopefully I haven't forgotten too many things. Oh, I forgot that I cleaned the repository. So I'm going to be downloading a few things. But luckily, the client and the server for Redis are contained in the same image. So we only have to do this once. It looks to be going pretty well. Got a gigabit connection here, so it doesn't look that way, but I'm paying for it. So it's getting into the repository, and then the container will be created. There you go. The server should be up and running now. But as you may have noticed, or maybe not, depending on your Docker knowledge, I did not make any ports public to my local machine or my host, my Docker host. externally, that is. So if anyone calls my machine now from the outside world, they won't be on the same network. So now we need to get the client up and running. We're going to run something. How are we going to run it? Interactively. I'm not going to name this thing anything because, well, no one calls the client calls the server. But I would like this thing to run interactively. I would also like it to be, this container should be removed. Once I exit this, if I do it in a proper, nice way, it should be removed because there's nothing of interest once it's stopped. The client doesn't contain any data. There you go. But I should also tell this client, or rather tell Docker that we are on the same network A. And that's a good thing, otherwise it wouldn't work. I'm going to base this container on the Redis image, the same thing, but we're going to start something else. We're going to start the client. And I didn't know this by birth or anything, it's just something that I saw here. It's I've used name value stores before, but I'm not a Redis guy at the moment. But here's how to start the client. You also need to tell the client something about basically who you're going to call. You need to call the server, and you tell it this by adding some parameter. What is the value of that? Well, wasn't it called server A? I believe it was. So we're running it interactively. It's going to be removed once we are out of the main process. It's on the correct network, I believe. We are basing it off the Redis image. Once it's up and running, it's going to start the Redis command line interface. And to that client thing, we're going to be sending it information about who to contact. And that's the server. So hopefully I've done this correctly. Looks good. The client is connected to server A using the default port for Redis, which seems to be 6379. We're gonna just try to read a value out of this. This is basically my current Redis knowledge I can get and set things, but we're gonna get the value for the key test. It was nil. Looks like someone forgot to set their values. So we're gonna set a value for this. It works. We're setting a value inside the server from our second container where the client is running, and now we're gonna get, hopefully, a value back. It works. That's great. So now we can actually exit the client, which is going to make the second container, the client container, vanish as well. And in order to see that everything is the way we want it to, sometimes things happen. We're going to look at all the containers, even those that are stopped, but we only have one, which is running. It's the server. But we're gonna do a nice cleanup here of everything. So we're gonna stop the server A. We're stopping server A. And then we're gonna remove that one, but I'm just gonna type remove 9, which is basically I'm just looking at this thing and there are no other containers, so I'm just using the leftmost character here. I'm gonna be removing something else. It has to do with networking. I'm removing network A because there's no one else who's going to be using it. I don't want old networks laying about. And I forgot, as I usually do, I need to tell Docker what to do, not just there's something about networking that needs to be done. So I forgot to say remove. Here I'm removing it. That's great. And then finally, we're just gonna be removing the image. So image, remove, and then Redis. And we should be all done with cleaning up our system again. That's great. Now it's done. So we're having a look at the images. We're just listing those. Images are gone. And Docker, network, listing those as well. There should be none. There should be 3, but none of my own. So image gone, network gone, and containers are all gone as well. We could, that's so silly because it wouldn't be there if the image is gone. But we're just looking at all the containers. There should be none. That's great. So what did we do in this video? Well, we set up a Redis server inside one container. We set up a Redis client inside a second container. And before we got those two up and running, we set up a network. Both containers were told to use that network, and then they could find each other. By naming the server using the creative name server A, the client could find the server, even though the client didn't know the IP address to call. It could look up the name. So Docker gives you some nice things for free, basically. And then we got the client to do some Redis-ing. We set a value and we read the value back. And then we exited the client. And by exiting the client and having some parameter, the RM parameter set on the client container creation, we got that container to be automatically removed once we exited. And then we just cleaned house. We removed everything. And now we have a nice clean system again, ready to do some other experiments. If you enjoyed this video, if you found it informative, if you learned something, then please give it a like. Thank you.